Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Lemon Dew podcast. I'm Brie, and in today's episode, I am going to be talking about the subject of autism representation in various media. Now, I understand it's been quite some time since I last released an episode, and to be completely honest, it's a mix of things. One is obvious procrastination, and two is because of real life issues as per usual, mainly pertaining to work, because I have been in the process of going through a restructure in my job. And also, I suppose, given this news, there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of whether I will have a job to go to next year. And with this uncertainty, it obviously creates a lot of tension and anxiousness because I have no idea what is going on. Of course, I'm still in the process of trying my best to find a job closer to home because my commute just wears me out mentally. So everything has been a bit all over the place. Now, of course, we are in what is supposed to be a festive year. If you celebrate Christmas, I do hope you've enjoyed the celebrations. Personally, I don't celebrate Christmas anymore, mainly because of an incident which happened 4 years ago in which a close family member had been stabbed to death. So it's always a bit of a bittersweet time because this happened a week before the actual holiday. So sometimes I kind of have those moments where I remember certain events playing in my head. But otherwise, whatever you're doing, just enjoy your time and just make sure you get as much rest as possible, especially if you are lucky enough, like myself, in which you have time off work. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. So with autism representation in media, this is quite an interesting one because, of course, there has been more awareness of sorts about autism, although sometimes when it comes to representation in various forms of media, it's not really covered very well, and it's very rare to have characters with a range of traits and personalities besides being autistic, which is something that kind of bothers me because obviously in terms of autism, whilst I do have it myself, I want to show people that it's not all there is to me because obviously it's almost as if I'm sort of put into this box where that is the only thing that makes me me, if I make sense. So when it comes to autism representation, it is refreshing when you have portrayals that are executed in a way which doesn't come across offensive and doesn't use autism, as mentioned, to define an entire character's personality. Because when you sort of flanderize a character and make them have one specific trait, you're not really treating the character like a person with flaws or real feelings. They're just basically a plot device. Now, of course, my main issue regarding autism representation in media is that there are a lot of cases where neurotypical people are telling our stories and not really considering how autistic people would feel about their idea of representation. In most cases, there are certain traits which are portrayed negatively, and of course this causes people to be close-minded by stereotyping us, which is not really a good thing. And the thing is as well, is when it comes to autism representation, I feel that in most cases there are times where directors or other professionals within the acting industry in particular are sort of, I guess, tokenizing autistic people. So I guess what I'm trying to sort of say is when it comes to, I guess, the acting industry, sometimes it's like they're just trying to fill a quota. So you're just ticking boxes rather than considering what people actually want in a film or a TV show or even a book or something, you know? And of course, when it comes to negative stereotypes and portrayals, not only do people categorize us in one box, they will also assume that every autistic person behaves a certain way, when really that's not the case, because as I've mentioned in several episodes, autism is a spectrum and every individual has different needs. So for example, I do have friends who, like myself, come under the level 1 category, but then again, we all have different needs, we all have different lives, we even work different jobs. So I don't know, you know, I work as a receptionist. I'm not really a big fan of offices because they are very sterile, but then there's that part of me that's used to it because that's most of my work history. But then there are others with autism who might not even cope in the job that I do, because obviously it's a heavily social role which requires you to talk to not only your colleagues or managers but also the general public, and it's kind of the same thing with anything else really. So to add to this, there are times where neurotypical people like to take credit for stories about autistic people. So rather than including the demographic they're supposed to cater to, they often like to make stories about themselves. And in a sense, rather than addressing what autism is, this is like an erasure of one particular group. So it's almost as if there is a problem with us being included in all sorts of media. And speaking of the types of people that are included, you often have characters that are white and male. I really don't want to make this a whole sexist thing because I'm not a person that likes to do stuff like that, but it is very common to see white males, as in, you know, in terms of types of characters having autism. And I guess it's because autism in women or minority groups isn't as recognized. So I mean, you know, obviously I am a woman and I am also black, and in the culture that I come from, which I've mentioned a couple of episodes back, autism is not really recognized because I mean, if you're born in the Caribbean culture like myself, it's either your family will deny that you're autistic, they will ask what's wrong with you, or, you know, depending on where you're at on the spectrum, they will probably stick you in some sort of home, like a care home or something, because there's this internal shame of having to deal with the fact that you have a disability, which in their eyes is considered as a hindrance. And it's the same thing with other minority groups as well, where autism as well as other forms of neurodivergence are concerned. Because I mean, for example, at work, I have a colleague who has ADHD and she comes from the Indian background, and it's kind of a similar vein in which there's not enough support within that cultural group, if that makes sense, because there's this sense of denial. And it's very sad because you know that there's support that's needed, but it's either the tools aren't there and you have to figure it out for yourself, which is what you do as an adult anyway, because I've had to do that since I didn't have much of a choice, or in other cases, the support is there, but no one really tells you. So again, it's like you're sort of like an alien in a sense. You're being transported into this planet, you don't know about anything, and nothing makes sense, basically. So let's talk about some examples of autism representation, shall we? Starting off with some poor examples because, oy vey. So one poor example of autism representation, which has been talked about quite a lot, especially in film reviews on YouTube, is of course the character of Music from Sia's controversial film, Music. And of course this film received poor reviews because not only were autistic actresses and actors weren't considered for the potential role, you also had disturbing scenes which showed autism in a negative light, mostly in relation to Music being restrained after having a meltdown, which really is not something you should do, because obviously that just makes the individual more uncomfortable and very distrusting of you. And, you know, seeing the brief clips from the film and such, it really pissed me off, to be completely honest, because if an autistic individual is having a meltdown, you really shouldn't be physically touching them or anything like that. You should just, you know, give them the space they need which is vital, because I mean, not that I've experienced having autistic meltdowns, because again, as mentioned, every individual is different, but I wouldn't really want somebody trying to restrain me, because for me, it's like I'm just kind of feeling, I guess, I don't know, suffocated. I'm not sure if suffocated is the word, but that's basically how I would feel. And of course, if something like this happens in real life, like I said, you need to give the person the opportunity to just calm down, Now, of course, the film was reviewed on YouTube, as mentioned. It was reviewed on various news articles, and there were a lot of questions, especially in terms of why actual autistic people were actually consulted in the making of the film, because having that feedback would be very vital in terms of producing a good film. Then, of course, there was the question of using Maddie Ziegler, who is a neurotypical dancer / actress from the Dance Mums reality TV show. And of course, the case of the actress, I don't really blame her, because I know there's been a bit of controversy in terms of her connection to Sia and everything from when she was a child. And I suppose this is one of those cases where she was given a certain piece of material. She had to work with that material. And, you know, with directors, obviously, a lot of them have controlling tendencies where they tell you to do things a certain way. So they don't really want to hear any suggestions or anything. Now, of course, you have other well-known examples of characters with autistic traits. So you have Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory, who is portrayed to be a smart individual with an IQ of 187. But then, of course, there's that lack of understanding of social cues, as well as humour, irony, and sarcasm. And even though it wasn't specifically confirmed, according to the co-creator Bill Prady, that he is autistic, I suppose in a sense there are people who can relate to certain traits, if that makes sense, although some can't, because of course his character falls under the autistic savant category. So there's the social deficits, then there's the superhero-esque abilities where intelligence is displayed in a certain area, I guess. And I mean, I don't know, I suppose in a sense, from personal experience, there were times where people have considered me, more so in secondary school, mainly the teachers, they'd sort of consider me to be a very stupid person. And I would always have to sort of prove a point to prove to all these people, including myself, that I am smart and I can do things, even though I do things or learn a different way. So there you go. Now, another piece of media that I've been exposed to, which is a manga, is called Sazanka. So this is a rare, I suppose, obscure one-shot piece by the author Kamiyama Aya. And it's about Tatsuki, who's a 17-year-old who has autism / Asperger's, which is an older term. And she tells the people closest to her about her diagnosis for the first time. And when I read this manga, I was actually crying, because not only was it executed well, in my opinion, but I felt for the character, because I've had experiences where it's taken me ages to actually tell people that I'm autistic. So when I used to be in school, mainly, people didn't know, because, of course, people would react very poorly. Whereas after I left school and I left college and I entered university, I suppose I started to become a bit more comfortable with mentioning that I was autistic, because once people knew, it wasn't like I was treated any differently. I was treated the same. And it's even the same thing with work, where a lot of my managers and colleagues know that I have autism. And I've only really had people sort of ask me, you know, what it's like to be autistic, especially as an adult, because I mean, the job that I work in involves young people, and obviously a lot of my colleagues have mentioned before that there are some with SEN that have not had any sort of diagnosis. So again, as mentioned, in most cases, especially within the Black community or certain cultures within the Black community, there is next to no support, which is the problem. Now, going back to the manga that I was talking about, there were a lot of things that were uncovered that relate to my personal life. So, as mentioned, I knew I was, I guess, different. I didn't know what autism was until my teens because I read my medical notes from my medical book that I still have. And one thing I mainly struggled with was being accepted, because there were times in school where I used to be treated differently. I used to have very ignorant questions, asked, if that makes sense. And I've always had to sort of suppress who I was for a long time, mainly by masking, even though I didn't know what that was until I became an adult, because obviously I knew I was doing it, I just didn't know what it was. Now, there were a couple of things about this manga that really bothered me. So the main thing that bothered me about it was the boyfriend. And I understand the point is to sort of show how people would react to such a thing. So in pages 15 to 20 specifically of the manga, the main character, who is Tatsuki, of course, she gets beaten up by her boyfriend, Akira, who is a prick, after she reveals her autism diagnosis, and she was insulted for certain mannerisms that she couldn't help having. So, she had a habit of being easily distracted from her conversations with others, being unable to process information, and she was told by her boyfriend, who is supposed to be one of her main supporters, that she isn't worth it. And when revealing the diagnosis, he told her that he could help her cure it, although obviously, as we all know, there is no cure for autism, and there never will be, and there is no medication for it. So, if you're taking medication for it, it's not really going to help you. It's just something that's been applied by the pharmacies because they sort of want to just use it as a quick fix, but there is no quick fix, and there never will be. Now, one thing that's quite interesting about this manga is Tatsuki's childhood friend Aoi. She accepts her as she is because she knew she was different, but even though she was autistic, she wasn't really treating her poorly. It was just the one thing that bothered her friend was the fact that she wasn't told first, because she would have supported her. And the boyfriend, who she dated for less than a year, knew about the diagnosis before she did. And I think it goes to show that, of course, whilst there are certain people who will not accept you for who you are, there are others who you realise or might not realise early on that will actually give you the support that you need. And of course, you just have to make sure that you try your best to gravitate yourself towards the right people. Now, another example of a great character with autism is JJ from Skins UK. And no, I'm not talking about Skins US, which is a poor imitation of the original because that doesn't exist. He was introduced in season 3. Yes, that's it. It was season 3 of Skins. And he is, of course, a white male character who has autism. And of course, the actor, who is neurotypical, actually dedicated himself to his portrayal of the character, mostly by doing research about autism. And of course, there are lots of things about JJ that you learn about besides him being autistic. So, he's got a good memory, he's got interesting facts on topics of interest. I said that twice. Interesting, there you go. And he has an interest, I'm doing it again, in doing magic tricks. And one thing I will say though is I kind of wish they kept the whole magic trick thing with his character in season 4, because from what I recall in Skins, I don't really think that was shown much. But I think when it came to season 4, I suppose that was kind of the point where the show just kind of, I don't know, it just fell off a bit in terms of the character portrayals and things. There were certain characters that didn't even get their own individual episode, which was a little strange. And I suppose it was because after that season, you had the Skins US season, or whatever you want to call it, being filmed. And then season 5 just, I don't know, it just falls off the bloody platform. But yeah, you have so many examples of characters with autism, whether it's negative or positive. It's just, you have to just dig through, I guess. Now, of course, there are times where people may, I guess, assume that there are certain characters that are autistic, although not confirmed. So maybe this is just my opinion, but I've started watching Gilmore Girls. I'm on season 7 now. Then I have to go through the Netflix edition of the show, which is A Day in the Life. So the main character, or one of the main characters, Rory Gilmore, to me has certain traits that could potentially be representative of autism, mainly in relation to her social issues, because in the earlier seasons she was kind of more of an aloof character in a sense, especially when she was going to the prep school, Chilton. Is Chilton a prep school? I think it is a prep school, but basically it's a school for the elites. Kind of like Gossip Girl. I don't remember what school the characters went to because I watched a show last year, so I don't know. But going back to my point, she did seem to have certain traits in relation to like her social issues and her special interest in books, because you would often see her with a book. Although over time, you know, when you go through the different seasons, she kind of comes out of her shell. And I mean, in season 7, we basically learned that she secretly likes the rich, preppy lifestyle, because I mean, her grandparents come from, I think it's old money. Her mum technically comes from old money, even though she decided to run away and, you know, do her own thing because she didn't want to be tied down to the Gilmore lifestyle, which I suppose I can understand, because obviously, especially with Emily, as in Lorelai's mum, because, you know, a lot of the girls are named Lorelai, at least in the Gilmore family. I don't know, I think it's a generational thing. But before I go off in a tangent, you know, that's the thing, is she wanted to do her own thing. Her parents didn't really, you know, like that. And she just wanted to carve a life for herself. So, yeah. And the same even applies to celebrities in terms of potential, you know, traits of autism and such. Because I don't know, there's one particular celebrity who unfortunately passed, Nikki Graham, who was a Big Brother legend who's featured in the original Big Brother 7, that's it. She was in Big Brother Canada, Ultimate Big Brother. I don't know if she did any other Big Brother related shows, but from what I recall, she had OCD tendencies in relation to, you know, issues with textures, issues with food, and she was anorexic as well. So I remember last year or the year before, I listened to her book, or I listened to one of her audiobooks in that format, and I read her book. I forgot, I think it was Fragile, that's it, that's the title. So I read that last year, and it was about her personal life in terms of dealing with anorexia, because she was carted to different hospitals, and then her life in terms of how she got on reality TV and everything. And I do think she may have had autism, I'm not really sure, because there were certain things that, or certain mannerisms she had that I could relate to, mainly in terms of the whole OCD thing when it comes to cleanliness, because I'm very funny with hygiene. I mean, I'm a person who sanitizes their work surface and their gadgets practically every few hours, because I just don't like the feeling of dirt. And it's the same thing when I see like a speck of hair on the floor. There's the compulsive need to just sweep it or hoover it. And when it comes to food as well, I'm very picky. So I eat most things, but then certain textures or smells just make me ill, as I mentioned. So, you know, if like someone's eating something with salad dressing or ketchup, I just have to get out of the room because I feel sick. And I just can't stand the smell, and even the texture of it just makes me want to gag. So, you know, certain traits that she had in relation, not so much in terms of anorexia, because I'm not anorexic, but I think it's more so in terms of the texture aversion thing and the hygiene thing. I could relate to it in a way, because I've had those issues when I was a child. I still have those issues now. So, yeah. You know, and I also relate to the whole thing with people touching personal belongings, because I remember on the show she had issues with that as well, you know, people touching her stuff. And it's the same thing with me. Like, if something's out of place in my room because someone touched it, I just get the feeling. I don't even need to look, I just know. So there you go. But yeah, in general, this is the topic of autism representation in media covered. So obviously, my opinion is, whilst it's great to spread awareness, you have to do it in a way where you are actually meeting the needs, if that makes sense, of the target demographic, rather than just, putting in what you think is right. So consulting actual autistic people is essential. It's fucking essential. And I will say it as many times as I want, but you get the point. Now, I hope you have enjoyed today's episode. This was kind of a long one, which is kind of a good thing because at least I'm getting back into the formatting. But in terms of the podcast in itself, I want to be more consistent in terms of releasing episodes. I'm going to stick to a schedule going into the new year where I release episodes every few weeks on a Sunday. But because I'm off work until the 2nd of Jan, I'll be releasing a few episodes hopefully within the weekdays and whatever. So yeah, anyway, until the next one, I hope you enjoy your time off or whatever it is you're doing during these festive holidays, and let's get prepared for 2026 because I've got quite a huge list of goals that I want to try and achieve. Well, not try, I'm going to do it, because if I procrastinate, that becomes a problem. So enjoy your time, enjoy your wine or non-alcoholic drinks, whatever, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.